Hi, my name is Sandy. I am a policy geek and I love this shit just as much as the mayor does. This is a great opportunity to bring together so many great people doing incredible work and for us all to acknowledge that we can't do it alone, right? How many themes have we heard today? I can't even, I made the list. I was like, oh, I'll hit on a couple. There are too many of them really for me to even start to process yet, but one of them is we can't do this alone, right? Whether that's in your community or in your city, you need your neighboring community, your neighboring city, the region, which is today's topic. If you're working in housing, you need your transportation partners, you need your nonprofit partners. So all of this is about how we come together, and I'm really excited for the conversation today. One of our panelists, unfortunately, became ill, and so she was unable to join us, but we're really lucky to have Enrique Castillo from, I'm never gonna get the name right, but I have the city right. It's the Chicago region, is they're planning CMAP.
Yes.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And then we have Councilor Ashton Simpson from the Portland area, an elected official. So we have two different models of governance here. So we're going to get to see not just how communities can come together as a region to talk about housing, but different governance setups that do that. And then I'll talk a little bit about what we have here just to make sure everyone's familiar with that. But first I want to go ahead and jump in and get started and ask you guys okay, so my first question that I'm supposed to read. But if you could just talk a little bit about the challenges that you're experiencing in your communities and how your organizations are addressing those. It'll be a good introduction of what you're doing to our community before we get started on the real Q&A.
Yeah, Enrique. Let's see. Well, I'll start us off, and thank you, Sandy, and thank you all for having me here. My name is Ashton Simpson. I'm a native Houstonian, so it's good to be back home to come and talk to y'all about the work that we're doing up in Oregon. I'll start by acknowledging that Portland is one of the fastest growing housing markets in the nation right now, and we're projected to have $1 million home market price by 2033. Wow. We also are facing a big housing shortage between not just Oregon, but Washington and our neighbors to the north in Vancouver, BC. A major piece of this is that we lack the large-scale sustained investments in housing, and we didn't have a safety net in place. And so, like many West Coast cities, we are now trying to build that. I like to say, fly the plane, build the plane, fuel the plane all at once. I'm an old Air Force retiree, so. And then I think that there are other issues that we face as electeds. So today I'll be introducing two of the major pieces of our work as a metro region. That's our 2020 affordable housing bond, our 2018 affordable housing bond and our 2020 supportive housing services measure. But there are challenges to that. They do raise in revenue. However, they sunset. They last 10 years. And so we know that we're dealing with generational crises that are going to take longer than 10 years. And I think sometimes the reality that sets in, because developers need that certainty and they need that timeline in front of them. Community needs that stability, but the public oftentimes looks at us for immediate results, which puts strain and pressure on programs that we need to have a solid foundation so that we can have the longevity in our housing markets. I'll say that, again, when I get into the presentation about affordable housing and the supportive housing services measure and how they're serving folks, I really have to thank our voters, because our voters were the ones that said, hey, we see this crisis on our streets. We have to do something about it, but we know we need the funds to do it. And so my hat always goes off to those folks, because they not only put me in this office, but they help support the work that we do, because we can't do it without that. So I'll pass it to Enrique.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so honored and privileged to be sharing my experience. So my name is Enrique Castillo. I am a principal planner at the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning. We just call it CMAP for short, because we're planners and we love our acronyms. So CMAP. A little bit of background there, because it's important to understand the creation of CMAP. So in 2005, we were two separate entities. And our legislator decided that we needed to combine our transportation agency and our land use agency together in order to achieve regional goals. And so in 2005, we became CMAP. We serve Northeastern Illinois. We're the third largest MPO. We have 284 communities, 7 counties. In that 284 communities, we also have Chicago and its 77 neighborhoods as well. So we serve a little over 8.6 million residents in our region. So I'm really excited to jump into talking a little bit about our journey as a regional perspective in housing. And so we've been in the space doing housing work for a really long time, but it wasn't until the last, I would say, maybe 6 to 7 years that we've really amped it up. And we've decided that as a regional entity, we needed to, because our munis have asked us to really step into the space to start thinking about our regional housing plan. And even though we've been doing this for such a long time, we're just now 2-3 years out from completing that regional housing plan, because we know that there's no one size fits all, right? We know that there isn't going to be one formula that's going to solve the housing crisis. So we need to tailor it and customize it to each muni. And so in order to do that, there's a little bit of work that we have to do, and we have been doing, to get at least an even playing field before achieving that goal. So.
And just as a reminder, MPO is the Metropolitan Planning Organization, and they do the regional transportation plans, and they get the federal funds to then distribute for those plans. And then that tied in, can you just real quick, what the authority of your land use planning side of things?
Yeah, so we wear 2 hats. We're the MPO, but we're also designated by the state of Illinois to be the planning organization as well. So we don't have COGS or anything like that, but we have our Council of Mayors. We have 11 Council of Mayors that actually provide feedback and are part of our board. And that's where we get the funding, a lot of IDOT funding and HUD funding for that work that we do. We do have a regional plan onto 2050 where we deploy our planners. We have about 30 planners in our planning division, and we're the ones that work with the munis across the region to help them obtain the goals that we have set on onto 2050. So.
All right, thank you. On our MPO is just about to approve our 2050 plan next month, which is and we all know that there isn't really a coordinated effort from the state level on land use planning in the state of Texas, as you know from your time here before. And let's hear more about what's going on in Portland.
Yeah, so can we get to the slides?
Sure, yeah, let's get those.
The Portland region is broken up into 6 districts, and I have the privilege and opportunity to serve in District 1, which includes the east portion of Portland, the 4th largest city in Oregon in Gresham, and 3 smaller cities in Troutdale, Fairview, and Wood Village, as well as in an unincorporated rural area that decided they didn't want to be a city, but they want funds. It's a weird thing, but we'll get there. We'll get them there. I've also previously led Oregon Walks, a pedestrian advocacy organization up in Portland, Oregon, as their executive director. And I'm also a small business owner of Electric Vehicle Advancement, or as we call it, EVA, as we roll out our EV infrastructure in Oregon. And again, I talked to you all about my time in serving in the Air Force, but this blending of the background of service and infrastructure is how I got here today. And so I'm really thankful. And I'll tell y'all this, and I'm gonna say it because I'm here. My grandma, her name is Bertha Sanders. You know what she told me, y'all? She said, go learn something, learn it well, and then come back and tell our people. And I feel like I'm doing that.
That's great.
So again, Metro is the only directly elected regional government in the country, and we serve over 1.7 million people across 24 cities and 3 counties. We manage regional transportation planning and land use planning, waste systems, natural areas in which we are the biggest holder in the region at 19,000 acres of nature space, which is why Oregon and particularly our region is beautiful. And we also operate key venues like our Oregon Zoo, the Expo Center, and the Convention Center. And in recent years, we expanded into housing, recognizing the regional problems require regional solutions. My job as a counselor is to make sure the folks in District 1, which is, and I'm gonna say this like with a lot of love, and it's been ignored, but it's the part of the region that has been ignored and where a primary portion of our underserved community lives. And I wanna make sure that these folks aren't left out of these solutions. At Metro, we're committed to the idea that housing is a human right. The two major initiatives, again, that we launched are the Affordable Housing Bond and the Supportive Housing Services Tax. Both work together to build homes, but also provide the wraparound services that folks need to stay housed and get the support that they need. So in 2018, again, and I'm gonna thank our voters, this bond raised over $650 million to create nearly 4,000 permanently affordable homes for low-income families, seniors, veterans, and folks with disabilities. Metro oversees the funding, but the counties and the cities are vital in that partnership because they actually implement and do the building on the ground. So this effort is fully funded through 2027 and is helping to build the long-term housing stability that we're looking for. But I'm sure, as you can imagine, there's a lot of politics that plays into this thing, a whole lot of politics. So we won't get into it a lot today, but I can share a little bit. And then in 2020, voters approved the SHS measure, which raised $250 million each year to provide services for folks experiencing homelessness. And we categorized them in populations A and B, A being chronically homeless, B being on the verge of being put out, eviction. And we linked those funds to job training, mental health support, and rental assistance. And it's funded through a 1% tax on individuals and couples, as well as bigger businesses, so corporations. Sorry, I'm almost done, and I'm gonna give it back to you, Sam, I promise. So why is Metro looking at the future of the housing bond now? Simply put, as I said in the beginning, things are starting to sunset. Our affordable housing measure will sunset in 2028, and if we don't take actions and steps now, our supportive housing services measure will sunset in 2030. With that, that means programs will have to ramp down. That means building of affordable housing will ramp down. That means folks will not get served and folks will be on the streets continuously. And so we are having hard conversations right now within our region to talk about how do we extend the supportive housing services measure so that it can have some flexibility in terms of if we can build, how we build affordable housing using those funds to acquire and build affordable housing as well as site acquisition. And I do want to say this, before all of this took place, Metro was always involved since 1998 in transit-oriented development. It was funded through a mix of federal transportation dollars, fare box revenues from TriMet, our regional transit organization, and as well as construction excise tax. And it's really the perfect blend of how you use transportation and land use planning to do housing, particularly in communities that really need it. And so, thank you.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I want to come back to the transit conversation, but first, I've been hearing a lot about the need to educate and inform, reframe, remessage, depending on how you want to talk about it. It's all the same thing, right? Like, how do you convince people that what we think is the right thing to do is the right thing to do? And you're going through that process right now. You talked about your district being one that's had greater needs and being left to the side for so long. How do you have that conversation with your fellow counselors and their constituents? Because I would presume that more of that investment might be going in your district, maybe not, but how are you having that conversation?
Honestly. So I'll tell you this little texture. I'm the second Black counselor to ever serve at Metro, and it was a 25-year gap between myself and the last person.
Wow.
And so think about 25 years or a quarter century of not being at the table to guide policy discussions or have a voice around major things like future visioning of a region. You don't belong there if you're not at that seat. And so it's been one where, to be quite honest, eye-opening for some, because I mean, and this is, I'm saying this with a lot of love, Oregon's a really white state. There's not a whole lot of folks that look like us in that state. However, my challenge to them is we represent such a small population within the state, it shouldn't take too much to lift us up. And that was my key to them this week at our work session, was like, look, all the talk about equity can't count when only you say it counts. Equity comes from taking the folks that have been impacted, particularly in this case in Portland is the Black community. A highway stripped away their community, I-5. The albino community was ripped away. Subsequently, it pushed folks further into Northeast Portland. And then after the downturn and displacement and gentrification, now they're out in District 1. So it's been this continuous displacement, now they're at the fringes. Folks that look like me are at the fringes. They're not a part of the socioeconomic process. They can't get access to economic opportunities or even play because transit doesn't run in those communities. You gotta have a car. And if you know anything, it's expensive. I think gas up in Oregon right now is probably like $5.74 a gallon. Yeah, right. So if you live on the fringes and you gotta drive every day to come into work, it's not feasible. And so I think as in this moment, I'm gonna just say it, you gotta rest in your laurels and you just gotta hold tight and say, hey, look, you've done this status quo business for decades now, ignoring an entire community. Time is nigh to stop. And we're gonna be intentional and we're gonna show up. And honestly, I like holding their feet to the fire.
Is that the Air Force in you?
Yeah, that's the Air Force in me, so.
That's great, thanks. Well, we've heard a lot about intentionality, right? There's a lot of ways to leverage that.
Yeah.
Well, Enrique, let's hear some about that. Your organization pulled together the housing authorities in the region to get them to work together. Mm-hmm. So let's hear some more about that because I think it ties into this equity conversation as well.
Yeah, so again, we've been doing the housing work for quite some time, and one of our first roles was actually as CMAP was to convene folks, right? We decided that in this space, in the Regional Housing Initiative, which our sister planning agency, the Metropolitan Planning Council, not to confuse it with CMAP, started this program, and they received funds from HUD, and they brought in another partner, Brick Partners, to really think about like, okay, we can't move the needle when you're talking about housing choice. You know, what is it that is available to folks and what's not available to folks? What is that gap? What is that need? And you can't really start planning for that unless you can identify it. So our first role really was to bring these folks to the same room for them to have that conversation, right? So you had our housing authorities, our public housing authorities. There was 10 plus of them, right? Including the Chicago Housing Authority, which is a huge entity in itself. To think about like, okay, well, even within this, like how many folks are on the voucher program? How many are on the wait list, right? So if there's new development, if there's new affordable housing developments, who's gonna go where? So we brought them together really so that they can have that conversation. And then IDA, the Illinois Development Housing Authority, who provides a lot of the funds that provide the low income tax credits, started thinking about like, well, is there a way to think about it holistically, right? So if we think about opportunity areas within the region, and if there's new development that needs to be in this area that's affordable housing, what does that look like? And who can we bring in, right? And how can we distribute those folks that have been on wait list among these public housing authorities? And so that was huge. And so that was like the first iteration of it, just having that conversation. They would meet on a regular basis. And it really is to just have that conversation of who has new developments and space so that we could exchange some vouchers. The second part to that was thinking about those opportunity areas was scoring them. Scoring the developments, right? So that if you came to the table and talked to the housing authorities about what the need is, right? You came to CMAP that had a scoring rubric on opportunity areas, right? Where you think about walkability, you think about transit hubs, you think about access to services, right? Just those things will help, score your development. And so you then present it to IDA, the Illinois Development Housing Authority, that comes with a letter of support from our agency saying these folks checked all the boxes in order to present this development of affordable housing. It just opened up, the gates, the opportunities. So more and more people started, to be part of this process and coming to the table to have these conversations. So again, just convening folks, right? The housing authorities, but not even just the housing authorities, but even the local government too, right? The mayors, getting them to understand what is that need, what is that gap, so.
Wonderful. Well, Councilor, I wanted to swing back to the transit-oriented development that you had mentioned. Can you talk a little bit about that process and your thoughts behind, this is my perspective on it, so tell me if this played in. it's a way to incentivize private sector, right, in this conversation. So if you could speak a little bit to that from a political perspective, from a government, because we heard some differing views on how you could leverage that earlier today from some of our electeds that I think are all valuable, and I'd love to hear kind of what thought process went into what you all are doing and how you developed it perhaps in partnership.
That's a good question. So because we have so many jurisdictions, right, like it's up to each one how they want to develop in terms of density. So like sometimes we have an opportunity where like we're in Portland, and Portland very much is like, yes, give us the density, give us the extra 2 floors or however many units that is on that project. And we oblige and we support that. I think that when you get more out into the more rural parts or the suburban parts of the region, it becomes, we don't want that many floors, right? It becomes that almost like yeah, we want it, but not that much, you know? And my push to folks is this, look, our governor has mandated that we are in a housing crisis shortage, right? So just based on that alone, we know statewide we are short homes. And there's a project, and I'm gonna come back and share it with you all, and maybe you can share it out with folks, but it's called the Montgomery Park Project down in Portland, Oregon, in the heart of downtown. That's a transportation project that they have asked Metro to support through its regional flexible funding allocation dollars to put in a streetcar. Well, putting in that streetcar is gonna activate possibly upwards of 15,000 units of homes for folks to live in. And so the city of Portland really is like, hey, Metro, like they're leaning in, like, we know you have this tool, TOD, we have this space, we have this streetcar, we know we're in a housing crisis and a crunch. Will you support us? And we're like, yes, of course. Now, mind you, it has to go through some levels. It has government, the bureaucracy. When I was an executive director, I loved being able to move at the speed that I wanted to move at. But being in government, it has slowed down a lot. And so like this project that I'm talking about had to go through the technical policy advisory committee and then moved up to us, which I sit on the Joint Policy Advisory Committee on Transportation, JPAC. Then it has to come to Metro Council for final approval. That's a long time. It takes about 5 months. I'm used to getting things done like that. And so that's been my challenge around that. But however, with TOD, it's been a tool, again, since 1998 that's been used and has brought in almost 7,000 units of homes. And I think that it's gonna continue to grow because it's now become such a part of the fabric of the region. Every corridor is like, hey, can we get some more dense housing where this frequent bus line is running? Hey, can we get some north-south connections because now we're building housing out here. And so now we're playing like a chicken and egg situation in parts of the region. Like there's housing going in and now communities advocating for the transit as opposed to vice versa. And so I'm enjoying it. I think that TOD as it exists, now I don't know about the federal formula on that side. We don't know with this regime. However, we'll see.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the first moral of that story is never waste a good crisis, right? Get what you can when you can. And then I think going back to what I said earlier, right, pulling those different policy areas together. We know that transportation and housing work together. You're all familiar with the Housing plus Transportation Affordability Index, right? Because affordability is about more than just one indicator. It's about each of those things. And it's so great to see, you know, these places where those two topics are coming together. Enrique, can you talk a little bit more about sort of how your housing, and I know that in some ways you're very nascent in this, even though you've been doing both those entities obviously have been doing that work for a long time, but doing it together, how are you starting to weave together the housing, land use conversation with the transportation planning piece?
Yeah, I think and it's no surprise, right? I think one of the biggest barriers to developing new housing is the zoning, right, and the land use that currently exists. And so, you know, one of the things that we started doing was really looking at communities that could use an update on their zoning and doing a study around that and providing some suggestions and recommendations around that. And so that's the catalyst to, you know, those hurdles, right? You know, when a few years ago there was the pro-housing grant that was put out by HUD, and because we have, been convened all these folks for so many years, they thought that there was a great opportunity to do a regional application. And again, this goes back to like everyone's on a different stage, right, on their journey with those obstacles. And so we put together this application. Unfortunately, we didn't get it, but that was really like the turning point for us. We decided that, CMAP was going to start, working at the county level with the different counties and really addressing that. So we currently have what we're calling 2 housing readiness plans. Again, they're at the county level, and it's really doing an analysis of what their stock looks like and identifying that gap, identifying, who is this housing for and what is the need, and then creating that checklist, right? So if you eliminate those barriers, right, whether it's zoning, whether it's infrastructure, whatever it may be, now you're prepping for shovel-ready projects, right? And so you have a developer that comes and sees all these obstacles. What do you think is going to happen? They're probably going to go somewhere else, right? Mm-hmm. But if you check all the boxes, then you're ready. And now they don't have to jump through all those hoops, right? And so they're going to, put their money there and invest in that community. And when you invest in communities, through housing, you think about the big gap really is that workforce housing, right? If they're having to live somewhere else to go to work, that means they're leaving their homes, their neighborhoods, so they're not spending their money in their neighborhood, right? So that's economic development. That's a missed opportunity. So.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. And don't forget, y'all, you can put questions in the app. You can vote up questions that you think are really high priority so we can get to them sooner. One of those I wanted to bring forward actually is a little bit from the last panel, but it has a regional angle. It kind of gets down to brass tacks of what you guys are dealing with on the ground, or if not you, some of your members are potentially. So many regions are seeing an increase in development of HOA housing, right? And so they're putting their own restrictions on, but that can really kind of prevent rules related to ADUs, they specifically mention, but other types of missing middle housing. How are you addressing that challenge, both through your local communities and on a regional basis? What does that look like?
Oh.
Easy ones, right?
I don't know how to give you 24 different answers because that's what it is. It's 24 different answers. Mm-hmm. The city of Portland, their ADU program, which is wonderful, looks amazing compared to, say, let's use Hillsborough on the west side of the region. They don't have one. There's no ADU program. And so it's kind of like, yeah, there needs to be a more robust development of that. But the way Metro works, and again, we aren't like, I know there's this thing about having hierarchy or, the chain of command. We're actually partners. And so for a great example, we just had our urban growth report where we looked at our urban growth boundary, which Metro manages, to talk about if we want to expand it based on how much land we need for site readiness for industrial lands, housing, employment, all the things. And it's up to local jurisdictions to submit their application to Metro for urban growth boundary expansion. Out of 24 cities, we got 1 on this last go. And this is a 7-year process, so this only happens every 7 years. It's just not there.
Mm-hmm. Well, Enrique, I want you to answer that question and then maybe tie in some of we were just talking before this about a grant that you all have received to help with education and helping the community speak the language that you all are speaking and understand the challenges and perhaps how the solutions you're putting forward. And that might be also, it kind of gets into this implementation question, right, of whether you have the authority as an organization to make something happen versus you're trying to bring everybody along with you.
Well, I'll tell you, so we are the collector and the distributor to our local county and city jurisdictions. However, we do have KPIs in place, and when they are not met, so for example, we had to put Multnomah County, one of our bigger counties, on a corrective action plan because they were not spending down dollars, they were not meeting KPI, right? Okay. The conversations we're having now, because the first iteration of the supported housing services measure was, and I'm gonna say it, built quickly without a whole lot of governance or structure or accountability built in or baked into it. And now we're coming back around almost 6 years since its inception and saying, hey, if we're gonna extend it, then we need to put these things in so they can work. But guess who's not happy about it? The folks who receive the money. They don't want restrictions on those dollars. They want to keep spending the dollars the way they want to. And that just can't be. Because the oversight stops at us. So, and then our auditor scrutinizes that oversight. So for me, the buck stops at us. Now, our county partners and some of our mayors tend to not believe in regionalism, and they think the program should sit in the counties and in the cities. And I push back on them, and I'll say, well, it's called the Metro Supportive Housing Services Measure, not the Tri-County body.
There you go. You got to keep pushing the fight, right? Remind the people what it is that they said that they wanted, and you're giving it to them.
No, they're not used to no texting up there. I'll tell you that.
All right, Enrique.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have that type of jurisdiction where we can, regulate the type of developments or even like you mentioned with the HOAs. But I think one of the things that we do very uniquely, we're also the data hub for the region. And so we provide data for communities. And one of the things that I noticed that kept coming up was, hey, Enrique, can you just provide housing data, but not just what comes in the census, right? Because that's just like one side of the story. And so one of the things that we're rolling this out at the end of the month is our community, our housing profiles. We already provide what we call the community snapshots for all the munis in our region, and then at the county level as well, and then the regional level. It's a full data pool of what your community looks like from the census lens, right? So your population, your ethnicities and race, and blah, 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 right? And so again, going back to that, hey, can you provide housing data? We don't have it other than, how many units are in the community or the age. So what we did is we did a little analysis and we created housing profiles. So now communities can think about, what does it look like, if you're talking about cost burden, right? If you're thinking about how many units are there available for someone in this income bucket versus this income bucket, right? And thinking about how folks jump around in the income buckets, the more money that you make as well, right? So now you're also taking away housing from folks that need it for this income bucket. So that's just an example of the data that we're going to be providing for the communities so that they can think about, their CDBG dollars. Or if they're looking to go out for grants, they already have the data. They don't need to recreate it. So this is just accessible to them. All they got to do is download it. And then the second part is, thinking outside of the box on, there's certain funding restrictions, right? You can't, as an NPO, we can't just go out and do whatever we want, right? There's certain transportation projects we have to do, and then there's our regional goals that we do planning in order to get there. So we were thinking like, all right, well, then there's got to be a way to do some of this housing work, philanthropy dollars, right? There's a lot of them out there, and there's a lot of folks that want to partner up to do this work. So an example of that is we have a county that has been doing housing plans at the county level, at the muni level, within their county, and they're just sitting on shelves. And nobody wants to create plans that sit on shelves. You want to be able to implement them. So we had been talking to them, and they were like, man, if there was just a way that we could do outreach and engagement and education around what does affordable housing actually mean? What does that look like? What is the missing middle? What are just all the topics, all the barriers, right, to creating new housing? What if we just, we have 8 sessions within a year, and we create a task force, based off of these topics that we're going to be doing for a year. We create a task force, and we end it with the summit, and we along the way, we create branding for this task force. We give them an entity so that they can take on some of these housing issues, either at the county or at the local level. And so we actually just were granted philanthropy dollars to do this work, right? Because there's no way that we could use our funding for doing a whole year's worth of engagement and outreach and education. And I have like a plan, right, to say, hey, this is the end product. But the end product is really that task force to address that, so that in phase 2 now we can think about why haven't those plans worked, or how can we implement the plans that are existing. So
That's great. We can move from, all the planning that we're all trying to do to action and really seeing it on the ground. I want to give a little more context about here in Central Texas because this plays into it. For those of you who have been around for 25 years, back in the early 2000s, we embarked on something called Envision Central Texas. It was a conversation in the 5-county area of, it's growing really fast and the traffic here is horrible and affordability is really challenging and we can't find the housing that we need. And what are we going to look like as a region if we keep growing like this and don't do anything about it? And so, they went through the process of forecasting that out, engaged with the region of, worked first through like, what are some of our options? What are the things that we could do to address some of these challenges? Took input from elected officials, local community members. I know that Mayor Houston, who's here, was part of that process when she was a council member in San Marcos. There are many others who've been in the room today as well that participated in that. But they took community engagement through the newspaper. Remember that hard copy thing? They mailed it out. It was like Parade magazine. It showed up as an insert in your hard copy newspaper. You opened it up and it was like, oh, look, if you're interested in transit, and here are some of the options and what that could mean for housing. And it started to help sharing the information in the region of how these things intersect, and then took input, like, what is it that you would like to see in your community? And then mailed them back. And I think the numbers, don't quote me for sure, but I'm pretty sure it was around like 600,000 of them went out and 200,000 of them came back. Like people filled them out and mailed them back. And that became input into the process to develop various scenarios that people were providing input on. The oversight group, it didn't have state or local legislative authority of any sort. It was business, civic, and elected official leaders in our region and the agencies that they are part of that came together and funded that organization and that effort and came out with a plan with a toolbox. And then over the course of the next decade, many of the communities in our region looked at that and said, this is the piece that we're interested in. How can we get there? There happened to be some federal funding available through a grant program that a number of them used and implemented that in their communities and made progress on that. We did a look back at AARO just a couple years ago. It's on our website if you want to look at it. What were those original goals? In looking at it today, right? We scrubbed it for apples to apples comparison from today to then. Like, what were those goals and how close did we get? So scenario A was business as usual. We're going to get what we were going to get if we didn't change anything. Scenario D was the most progressive in terms of change. And as you might guess, or maybe not, it was a little surprising to me, we ended up in between C and D in terms of what the community wanted. But where did we end up in terms of what we have? We're really a lot closer to A in most categories. But I would challenge you from getting too disheartened from that and saying, oh, well, we didn't do anything. We actually did a lot. It's just that we grew so much faster even than was estimated at that time that it helped keep us from losing some of that progress that we would have otherwise. And so I put that out there as another example of how we can come together as a region and have already done here in the past as a way to think about what can we do as a community and thinking about housing and housing affordability and affordable housing and what does that mean for Central Texas and how can we work together in ways that provide tools to the different communities at different levels. And one of the questions that is here ties into that, which is how do you ensure neighborhoods still have a voice in regional, regional housing and planning approaches. And so it's at really micro level, how do they feel heard in this bigger regional conversation to ensure that we have that equity? So I'll let you start, Councilor.
Of course. I like this one because this is the fight. Everybody thinks Metro is trying to tell them what to do. And I think I've only been in this role now for probably about 27 months, give or take. And I will say the first thing that I think that you do with communities is you start with the trust building process. I'm a community development major. That's always been the first thing we were taught, as well as the first rule is you shut up and listen. You don't come into a community, you don't dictate to them what they should have. Great example, that community I was telling y'all about, Damascus, that decided they didn't want to be a city. One of their biggest gripes to me was the previous counselors who occupied this office would come and talk top down to them about Metro policies, or they felt like the policies that they were putting on them, they were trying to turn them into Portland. That's always the thing. I don't want to be Portland, right? That's always what you hear from the cities on the outskirts of it. I went and talked to those folks, I think within my first 100 days of being in office. I met some of their business folks, and I think I don't think counselors had been out there in almost a decade. And I sat with those folks and I said, hey, I grew up in Texas. Let me tell you, I know what you want, but I'm gonna listen to you and you're gonna tell me. And they were like, well, our trucks run off the road. I said, oh, you want some shoulders? I said, you want shoulders? They said, yes. I said, okay, what's the next question? Grandma, can she get her meds? Can she get to the park? Can the kids get to school? Safe routes. I start giving them Portland language, but not forcing it on them. How are your kids getting to school? Are they getting there safely? Can you get to the grocery store? If you bike, not asking for bike lanes, do you have enough space between curb and street side so you can feel safe? And the amount of information that just came out of that meeting, because you go in and you just talk to folks. You have tabletop conversations. We all know how to do it. If you grew up down here, you know that manners and rudeness isn't tolerated, and you can sit to the table, break bread, have a drink with somebody, and ask questions. I think that when you go into a community, building that trust through that is key. And I want to end with saying that, like, at least on this point, that like bringing these communities along is helping us all move towards the goal together, not dragging them along. We want to walk hand in hand, and I think that oftentimes community looks at government, especially the seats that we occupy, as that. And I know right now there's a lot of uncertainty, and I think that this is the moment when we go into communities during that uncertain time and reassure them. One, at least I know in our region, because we're a sanctuary state, in a sanctuary city, we got your back. Two, I'm always listening to you. And three, let's get work done. Let's take care of our region. Let's bring jobs to our region. Let's bring better housing to our region. Let's bring vitality to our region so that when my son, who's 12, in 50 years, when he's 62, and hopefully God bless me to be 90, he can say, man, Portland's still a cool place. And his grandkids can enjoy it too.
Well, you want to follow that up, Enrique?
Very well said. I always like to say, and I can't take credit for this quote, but we plan at the speed of trust. And that's very important because, we're also, as planners, we're punching bags, right? You can't just show up to a community and say, this is what we're going to do. What do you think, right? And there's been situations where we show up to a community and we didn't even get to the planning topics. We didn't even get to that because they really want to talk about this investment that has been happening in their communities, how an interstate cut their community right in half and they lost their park because of that. Those are the things that they want you to hear you out. They want you to understand that, we need to check our privilege as planners. We've also caused a lot of harm in communities. And so they just want to get that out. And that's really important. And if that takes a couple sessions, then it's going to take a couple sessions because you can't, even start thinking about how you're going to help them if, you don't let them really verbalize what it is that's on their mind, right? There's been a legacy of that disinvestment in some communities, redlining. I mean, you all know the topics, right? And so I think that's also what the second part to that is making sure that the information is accessible. Right? I mean, like I said earlier, right? We love our acronyms, right? And sometimes we walk into a room speaking that planner jargon and they don't understand it. So you got to break it down to a level. So I always tell staff, like, hey, if I can't give this to my grandmother and she can understand what this says, then it's no good. We really got to think about that. And then meeting people where they're at, right? Usually when we show up to community meetings, if it's on a Thursday evening, you know who's going to show up. It's the regular folks that know what they want in the community and are going to verbalize that. I'm interested in that, yes, of course, but I'm also interested in the folks that weren't able to make it because they didn't have a sitter, right? Or maybe they're working that night shift, right? So meeting people where they're at, think about outside the box. Don't just have meetings when you're going to be excluding a certain demographic of folks in that community. And that's really important. So.
Can I?
Yeah.
There's one. You said something real important about highway stripping the community. When we leave here, I want everybody to go look at the Rose Quarter project in Portland, Oregon. It is the largest restorative justice project in the nation. They got $500 million to do reconnecting community to cap the I-5 Rose Quarter so that the albino community that was ripped away can reestablish itself.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to point out too, along that line, you can interact for at least I think the next month or so through the app with people who are here, but also we'll be able to put a reference to that project and others you'll be able to post so that people can follow up and see some of the things that were mentioned today that we want to make sure that everyone has access to.
I like to give homework. I'm always giving homework.
That's great. Well, starting to move, talking more about the suburbs a little bit, have you seen success in promoting or in helping grow moderate density in some of the more rural or suburban areas, exurban, whichever grouping it might fit in, communities, and how are you able to achieve that?
It's happening. Again, we have housing goals we have to meet per the governor's order and direction, and I mean,
It's nice to have a stick.
Huh?
It's nice to have a stick.
I know it is nice to have, but also there's a looming threat behind us because if we don't get cranked up and started on this housing production, if by 2035 we'll be short 1 million units between Vancouver, Canada, and down in Oregon, and so we got work to do. However, the local jurisdictions are tapping into it. They are wanting more housing. I think we've had a number of ribbon cuttings over the last couple of years in District 1 to open up affordable housing, and more to come. I think that the big piece, and he hit on it, was the economic development piece, right? Everybody wants to figure out how to make a way for themselves that isn't, subsidized. And so in Portland, at least in the region, that hasn't been their thing, and I have to remind them, I came from the H. I was like, it's busy. It's economics all day, every day, and so we have to turn that over because we have people languishing that are not working, that are falling prey to the streets, that are falling prey to gun violence, drugs, other things, and you see it. I mean, I'm saying it out loud, but literally, y'all, when I leave my house and I hit my main corridors, it's right there. There's the tents, or sometimes I'm sitting in the backyard hanging out, you can hear the gunshots. When you're steeped in it, and you talk about it, it's oftentimes when you hear it in these spaces, you're like, it's happening. But when you're experiencing it, and also as well as my constituents experiencing it, it's just like, well, come on, y'all, when we gonna straighten up? When we gonna actually come out and help folks? Because the piece for me around all of it, and I'll stop, is they've known, at least the communities that I serve, how the disparities have impacted people, down to the census tract level. They know the educational attainment levels. They know who's working. They know how much they're making. And I'm like, we've known this now for 20 years. They've written articles about it, the 40 most persistent poverty census tracts in Oregon. And you can point at them, and most of them are in my district. And I'm like, well, if that's the case, why aren't we being intentional about showing up at that level and taking care of folks if we have that much data?
Well, that sounds like a little bit of the answer to my next question for y'all, which is, what is the advice that you have for the folks here today? Maybe in a less targeted piece, but zooming back out to thinking about housing on a regional basis and getting disparate communities that are the range of life experiences and community and development types, and bringing those all together. What advice would you have for this group?
Well, I see a room full of passionate folks here that at least believe in the messaging, right? That there's a need for housing, but it's like, how do we get there? So I think the first thing is connecting with the champions, identifying the champions, right? At this level, but then at the community level too, right? I think that's huge. And then breaking down those silos, right? I think, the theme of this whole summit has been, you need to get together and have these conversations. And I think that's gonna go a long way. So breaking down those silos, because guess what? There's probably someone else out there trying to do the exact same thing that you are. So let's start having those conversations. Let's start thinking about funding, and let's start thinking about how to implement. So,
yeah. Collaboration. Monday, when I led our president's work group, This year I get to serve as our deputy council president, and our president asked me to facilitate our conversation with our 24 cities and 3 counties. There's, again, I'm gonna talk about the politics. There's been some tension, old egos, bruised stuff, past harms, whatever. I literally looked at that room and said, check your crap at the door. We came here to work. If you don't want to work, you can go now. And we got what we needed. Simple as that.
Well, that's great. Well, I've got one more question for y'all, but before that, so my organization, the Austin Area Research Organization, is really focused on the long term and the regional. So I talked about the research that we did looking back. On a forward basis, we have our social equity committee that's been around for a couple decades now, has worked on housing affordability over the years, various times. Was it maybe a decade ago or a little longer than that? We worked with Housing Works and various other organizations in Austin that led ultimately to the blueprint that was out there, right, that led to the bonds. And now we're back in that space again. We're having these conversations. Marcus Strada, who's the superintendent of Lockhart ISD, who's one of our members, is chairing that committee. And everybody's, I'm sure, heard about the teacher crisis, and one of the challenges being how can they find affordable housing or housing affordable to them. And he's working in that space, and we are super interested in seeing how we can lift up a community conversation in Central Texas around what does it look like in our future for housing, and how can we as partners and neighbors work together to bring that together. So I will encourage you all to keep that in your minds as you walk out of here today. And I want to ask you too, if you look ahead in your communities 5-10 years, what does success look like for the work that you're doing?
Well, one, folks are housed. We don't see tents on our street. We don't see folks afflicted with addiction. We actually have some place to go so that they can receive the help that they rightfully deserve. And then we're a region that works. People are working. I don't know if y'all know this, MLB's coming. That's 83 nights a year in Portland if we can get that. That means that is not only eyes and attention on us, but that's an opportunity for the folks who live and work there to actually tap in and make something for themselves. In 5 years, if we are back to the Portland that I could remember pre-pandemic and everything, plus some, and I say plus some because we had gaps still. It was a great place. However, if we can capture that and some and build on that, I think, again, it'll be a place where people can continue to come and see our beauty and enjoy us.
That's great.
Oh man, that's a tough question. I personally believe that housing is a human right. So I think for me, my own personal goal is really to think about, that gap and helping communities think about how do you start producing those units. So I think that's, a lot longer than your 3 to 5 year timeline. But you have to start somewhere, right? Mm-hmm. So I think identifying that gap is huge. I really do hope that, within the next 3 to 5 years, I can actually put together a regional housing plan, and a regional housing plan that isn't going to sit on a shelf. Mm-hmm. It's going to be a regional housing plan because we've put in the work for so many years that it's going to be able to be implemented and make big impacts and really provide housing for folks, and quality housing too, not just, whatever. So.
That's great. Well, I want you all to think about because what I heard here was progress and opportunity. So as you think about what it could be for our community 5 years from now or 10 years from now, think about what that would look like. And then, I don't know, is Sharmila's still here with Capital Metro? I saw on the back of her phone a Capital Metro sticker that says, "Your vision, our future." And that's about implementing the Project Connect series of projects, right? It's light rail, it's expanded transit options, it's looking and connecting better in the region. But I think that speaks also to what our opportunity is here, right? Like, what is your vision as the professionals? Then what is your vision as a region? And then that's our future, and we can build it together, and we have an opportunity. And I hope everybody, the conversations today, I've been really inspired by them, and I hope that you are too. I want to say thanks to the Housing Work folks for putting this together. I want to thank our panelists for the conversation today, and please stay in touch with everybody.